We live in a pretty chaotic world. The fluctuating economy can make it feel like we'll never be okay. You may be in a very unsafe or unfulfilling environment that can overwhelm you or drain you. Political conflicts, tragedies, and more importantly, the turmoil that may be happening inside of you. As an ENFP, I feel like we function best in the chaos and unpredictable environments of the world. But there's a limit, right? Once we become stressed or overstressed, we find it much harder to function. What is stress? Stress is described as a mental, physical, or emotional strain resulting from adverse or demanding circumstances. It can take up any form in our own lives. For some people, it's having to work a 9 to 5. For others, it's being a freelancer. For some, it's just existing. And for others, it's hiding their true selves. With that being said, there is good stress and there's obviously bad stress. We're mainly going to be focusing on the bad stress. But eustress, or the good kind of stress, usually creates the same feeling as bad stress, but usually in a good context. And that's the key with stress. It's heavily contextual. We all know what bad stress looks like though. The kind of stress that wears you out and makes you feel tired all the time. The stress that makes you lash out at your family and friends. The stress that is detrimental to your body and your mental health, and leaves you in an anxious and tense state 24/7. I made this video because while yes, everyone goes through stress, each personality type handles stress in a different way. It can have the same negative effect on us, but understanding what it may look like and how to combat it for each type is important, you know? So what does stress look like for an ENFP? ENFPs are the poster children of being out of the box and being accustomed to dynamic environments. This is because of their extroverted intuition, or NE. With that being said, we work pretty well under stress. I know most ENFPs think we work really well under pressure or under stress, but in my experience it hasn't been the case. Bearing in mind that we're all different, but I think what ENFPs think is working great under stress is actually ignoring the finer details that other personalities may stress about. As an ENFP, you mainly go off of extroverted intuition, which is a combination of input from the external world and your gut. Plus, any brain moves at 1,000,000 miles per hour, so it's kind of hard to be stressed over certain things if your brain has already thought about 50 obscure solutions to that problem that your company or team is facing. And again, I say this not to invalidate anyone, because being a healthy human being is about being able to operate under stress well. But I say this because ENFPs are some of the most emotional personality types, so we are the most likely to recognize our stress first, but the last group to do anything about it before it becomes a problem. When an ENFP comes under overwhelming amounts of stress, they can be overcome by what is referred to as the SI group. Introverted sensing is kind of the reality check of NE. It involves constantly gathering information and comparing past with current events. In a positive sense, types with strong SI seek information and sensory data in order to ground and understand new experiences about themselves. It creates security, unless you're an ENFP, in which case it's very underdeveloped and inferior. Inferior SI is kind of like the irrational child in our cognitive stack. It is underdeveloped, temperamental, and kind of holds us back. We have an over-reliance on our dominant NE function, so much so that our SI is underdeveloped. So when it comes time for us to use it, it goes against our very being and way of approach in life. Kind of like a rubber band, when we have exhausted our dominant function and are now heavily and kind of incorrectly relying on our inferior function, we go from this intuitive, easygoing optimist to a pedantic, self-loathing, and finicky pessimist who overanalyzes, overreacts, and overcorrects on their behavior and performance based on the information that they gather from their environment or through their sensory organ. A couple of other things that can happen when ENFPs are under stress is they can reject new ideas and new approaches, becoming rigid, and they might lash out if things don't pan out their way or exactly the way they want it to. Any compromise feels like you're being trapped against your own will and not being forced to comply, which is the worst feeling. They can completely shut down and retreat from the world. The big thing about ENFPs is that our body-mind connection is not the best. It's not uncommon for an ENFP to neglect their health in pursuit of something that interests them or neglect future consequences for something that they really want. And it's the same for stress. While we're in a stressed state, it can be easier to ignore or simply not be aware of our bodies crying out for help. You don't realize the amount of damage that's been done to your body or your own self-image until you take a step back from everyone and you introspect. This is where the most accurate ENFP memes come from, where ENFPs disappear without a trace from friends and family and just go on their own side quest. It's often a reaction or overreaction to stress or something going wrong within our lives and within our own perception of ourselves, and we need to distance ourselves from everyone to get it right. I'm sure there's been a moment in your life where someone or something happened that was so small or so inconsequential, but it just made you explode. Something small went wrong and you just broke down. That's not a coincidence. That's the buildup of stress and anxiety that has been ignored, and it finally builds up to the surface and explodes. Disappearing and being standoffish allows us to introspect more so that we don't get to that point. And it's just sort of a self-defense for ENFPs whenever they are being overwhelmed by their external environment. So I started a new job this year, and while I am grateful for the job, it was far from a complete yes. While the job itself is pretty cushy, it still stresses me out to this day. And the stress of my life completely changing led to me being super rigid and impatient and just flat out dismissive of someone who I felt couldn't rescue me from my situation that I was in. I always felt exhausted because of this persistent feeling of dread. In essence, I went from this carefree, fairly friendly person who was open to engaging with anyone to this quiet, avoidant person who dreads any interaction. Now, there's a much bigger reason for this stress, not entirely related to my job, and more so related to having this identity crisis of trying to fit into this adult world. It's something that I want to talk about in the future because I feel like as ENFPs, there comes a time when we have to reconcile that this world might not be best made for us. But the stress causes me to act out in my SI group, and sometimes I break down unexpectedly. Sometimes I just lose it. I've accepted that stress is going to be 100% part of our lives, and there's not really a way where stress will go away forever, but there are some ways that I've found to sort of mitigate the stresses of my life. 1. Having routines or traditions that I don't break for anyone, literally no one. It makes work a bit more complicated, but I'd rather deal with that knowing I have a way to stave off my anxiety. Stuff like exercising, taking an hour or two a day, just do absolutely nothing, and sleep. Stuff like that helps me to keep my mind in check. Time for grounding myself, time for meditative practices, time for therapy, all important. Number 2 is exercise. Exercise is a really great way of relieving stress, but it doesn't have to be lifting or anything like that. It can just be running, it can just be walking around, it can just be playing with your pets. I don't know, I feel like as ENFPs we sort of want to be more active, and I certainly will lose my mind if I sit at a desk for more than 2 hours. But yeah, no, exercise has been really helpful in trying to relieve my stress. And finally, the biggest advice that I ever got was to live in the moment. Seneca said that we suffer more in our imagination than in real life. And what other personality type has more imagination than the ENFPs? Staying in the present allows you to recognize unnecessary stress and keeps you grounded in the moment. Paying attention to your body and the environment around you can help you assess and sort of temper your anxiety. As always, if you have any feedback or suggestions, please let me know in the comments below.